Are you or any of your officials behind the Huawei link?
How are you? Absolutely not.
The Prime Minister has sacked the Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson.
I think that this is a Brexit story that we're seeing playing out in this.
In fact, he's pretty much been sacked.
We have this great division over Brexit. The Greens, the Lib Dems, who've been doing really well, they are saying they are benefiting from a disillusionment over Brexit.
This is the What and the Why podcast for the week ending the 3rd of May 2019.
Welcome to podcast 27, a significant number given that 27% of the universe is made up of dark matter, some of which is present in this podcast. For example... UK Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson sacked off by Prime Minister May in a Westminster whodunit, not me, Gov. And not only, but also, what year is it? Who's the president?
Leave
No, you stay here. I'm in charge.
Do you feel in charge?
Juan Guaido says he's the president of Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro says, well, I've got the guns. And it's guns before butter in that country, so Guaido may have let this opportunity slip through his fingers. It's the What and it's the Why podcast. It's good for insomnia. And speaking of dark matter, here's...
David Waywell.
Dr. David Waywell. How are you, David?
I was waiting for that joke.
You can see me coming a mile away despite it being a bit dark and it not really mattering. David, I have a question for you.
Oh, go on. Yes.
If a stealth bomber crashes in a forest, does it make a sound?
Yeah, of course it does.
I'm glad we cleared that one up. Yeah. Right.
Well, there's nothing stealthy about stealth bombers. It's just, they're loud, aren't
they? They are. Okay, I wasn't going to follow this one up, but if a stealth bomber crashed in a forest and nobody was there to see it, would it make a sound?
I always think yes. It's the same as the Pope in the woods. Sorry, reduce the tone. What is the one about a tree falling in the woods, isn't it?
David, this is a family podcast.
I'll beep that one out.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think it does make a sound on a philosophical level because, sorry, this is before we get to Gavin Williamson. Far more importantly, this may be a very human-centric view, but I don't really have much choice other than having a human-centric view, because the last time I looked, I think I was mostly human, probably about 3% Neanderthal, but go on.
You think a sound only exists if there's somebody who can hear the sound? If it's like perceived as sound?
Yes, insofar as there is no such thing as sound if we don't exist. I know it's very human-centric. Yeah. Because we haven't got the universe cannot know itself. There is nothing. There is no sound. There is no this. There is no that. Because without human beings to give it meaning and understanding, so it doesn't really make a sound. Now, in the laws of physics, it might, but in the laws of philosophy, if you prefer, it doesn't. Should we talk about Gavin Williamson?
Well, I'd just like to say the other side. I take it from the other point of view. As long as it makes sound waves, I think it's sound. So you don't need to have an observer to confirm it. So yeah, let's talk about Gavin Williamson. It might be a bit easier.
Well, he made a sound, didn't he? Allegedly into a phone call. Background: UK's National Security Council meets late April. It leaked. According to the leak, the government decides it will allow China's Huawei to provide the non-core components for the construction of the UK's 5G mobile infrastructure. Opponents, both in the US, and there might be more of that, and in the UK, horrified. Somebody so horrified, they leaked the decision. Subsequent inquiry says Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson, who was immediately fired. Now, I actually think there is a large Brexit element to this story, which I'll explain in a moment. But David, none of us have seen the evidence that it was him. Whether it was or it wasn't is important, but I don't think it's as important as the issues behind the story. But what did you make of it all?
Well, I was surprised actually because I was so sure it was going to be Sajid. How to do that again?
The Sajid. No, you thought it was going to be the Sajid.
I thought it was going to be the Sajid because when they actually announced all the, they revealed or the denials. His was the only one which sounded loyally, as in everybody else said it wasn't me and wasn't my people, whereas the Sajid said for any cabinet minister or any minister of the government to share sensitive information in the public domain is completely unacceptable. It was one of those sort of third-person denials. So I was really surprised when...
I immediately thought Mr. Williamson was the number one suspect in this sort of Cluedo who done it. It was the butler in the pantry, because he has been fairly leaky in the past. He's about the most ambitious politician you could ever meet. I'm not saying it is him, because we simply do not have access to the facts, and I suspect we never will, because I can't see at the moment there being a police inquiry. But there's something all very odd about it.
His denials are a bit too strong, though. I mean,
that's another thing. To swear on your children's life.
If there is evidence that it was him, then it really kind of ruins his career, because his denials are so strong.
But his career is if he does not if he cannot prove one way or another that it was not him, his career is in ruins, because you can't come back from this. Amber Rudd, when she had to stand down as Home Secretary, when it subsequently came out that most of the errors had been within the department, sometimes before she took over, but she stood down. You can come back from that, and she's back in the cabinet. You don't come back from this. So I'm not saying whether he's telling the truth or not. I don't know. But let's supposing he wasn't telling the truth, just for the sake of argument. If you are a character of a certain moral turpitude, you might say such a thing just to save yourself and your career. Taking the other side of it, if it wasn't him and he genuinely has, a case to put forward in his despair at being unfairly fired, he might say something as emotional as that.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think it has been rumoured or suggested in the past that he is a very political creature. I mean, he's got his eyes on the leadership. So, yes, that is entirely plausible. I'm just a bit surprised. It reminds me of the old line in All the President's Men about denials, where once they start to circle the wagons and come after you, it's like you've got to watch out, because the denials are so strong. You just think, well, has she got it wrong? But
I don't think it was very clever to sack him the day before the local elections. They should have let that dust settle and then do it. But that's
I was going to say whether this is. I mean, there's the moral argument, but this also comes down to politics and positioning for the leadership. And he was supposedly one of the people who saw himself as a potential leader, and is quite disliked by a lot of his colleagues because of his ambition. And he's also, he's a strange character, because he's the one with the tarantula, isn't he? He likes to scare people with a tarantula, and
also used to be a fireplace salesman, which led to the. Well, look, so hang on a minute. So he had a proper job, unlike many people who are career politicians. But it did lead to the rather good joke yesterday in Parliament that Gavin Williamson always speaks from the hearth.
I thought you were going to. I like the one online who somebody said she told him it was either her way or the way.
Way.
Yeah. So I mean, I didn't know he was a fireplace salesman, but
yes, and a tarantula keeper.
Yeah.
I'm sure tarantulas are very hard done by.
He's also the spitting image of Alan Partridge. But...
That doesn't help either. Also, before we get on to what I actually think is the bigger story in all this, there's probably not going to be a police inquiry, and that's because to leak a cabinet decision, which would have been announced anyway, is not necessarily breaking the Official Secrets Act. It's not like there was a top secret document which he read out to a journalist. This was a cabinet decision. So I don't think he's going to get the police inquiry. So people can fulminate as much as they want. So where does he go from here? Well, he goes from here leading there'll be an awful lot of people that want May out, that will close in behind him as part of the trying to get Mrs. May to stand down.
Yeah, but why him? I mean, leaks from this government are notorious, and there's people
this was of a different category. The NSI, it's sacrosanct. You don't. It's this thing within government, within the establishment, if you like, including all the intelligence services. Nothing should emerge from NSI meetings. Nothing. It's just one that's just considered way over a red line. I mean, you shouldn't leak anyway, but this one is a red line.
Yeah, so so you're actually thinking it's just he has been sacked from to make the legal point, the moral point, rather than a political point. Yeah.
Well, both, absolutely both. And if it was him, I think you do deserve to be sacked. And they say they have compelling evidence, which of course we may not see. I've had a look around the media. I mean, he hasn't got that many friends because he has been so nakedly ambitious, and people that are being whispered to in the media are being whispered, this is a slam dunk, it's him. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that proves anything, but like I said, be careful of who you annoy on the way up, because you're going to meet them on the way down.
Yeah, and his rise was meteoric. He came from absolutely nowhere, and he straight into a high position.
Yeah, fireplace. In fact, he's jumped from the firing pan back into the fire. Right, the bigger issue. Sorry to make fun of someone's political demise. Right, whoever leaked it, right, the reason for leaking it is to cause a backlash and force the government to reverse course. In other words, to say, no, we're not having Chinese technology in our 5G system because that's part of our national infrastructure. So, why would you want to do that? You'd want to do that because you don't buy into cozying up to China in the post-Brexit era. What you do buy into is cozying up to America in the post-Brexit era. Right, a little bit of background. Williamson is the guy who, when the aircraft carriers were announced they're coming online next year, said, right, the first voyage we're going to go straight off to the Pacific and show the Chinese, what Britain's made of. Which is exactly dovetailing in with American policy. Okay? Yeah. And he did that knowing that Philip Hammond was going to go on a visit to China. The Chinese immediately cancelled Hammond's visit. Right. You'll remember when George Osborne, was the Chancellor, he hailed the start of a golden era in UK-Chinese relations. The goal was China is the UK's second largest trade partner by 2025. But you have to fast forward. Suddenly we decided we're going to leave and it's Brexit. Well, that actually makes it more important to cozy up to China, given that we're going to need these trade deals. But that falls straight into a brick wall of cozying up to America. You can't cozy up to both. So Mrs. May has had some issues. Now, she started out taking a tougher line. Okay, she was the one who paused. The Chinese were going to buy about a third stake in building a nuclear power plant over here, Hinkley Point, and she paused it. She was bringing up things like steel dumping, intellectual property theft. But over the past couple of years since Brexit, she's been reversing course, and she's trying to balance this relationship. You can't do it. And so I think that is the bigger issue that is actually behind the Williamson sacking.
Yes, and this is what we've discussed this about 3 or 4 times at least on this podcast, the relationship with China and how Brexit will affect it. It's funny actually. I'm reading this biography of Churchill that a few listeners had recommended to me, and one of the things that surprised me is way back at, I don't know when, it must have been the 1940s, Churchill was even suggesting that America and the UK share citizenship because he was so keen on the relationship.
Because his mum was American, wasn't she?
American, yeah. And he was very proud of it. And he was, he had this idea that the English-speaking people could lead civilization. But this idea of Brexit, the other book I'd been reading recently was that Rise of Eurasia, and one of the points that made was how soft power it has a lot of influence in relationships, and if we leave the EU and we somehow go into a big trading deal with China, the influence they have on our culture actually becomes quite significant, as in we have to adapt to the way that they do things because they're the stronger party. And I think that was the argument Churchill was our similarities are much greater with America, and that's where we should make our trade, our bonds.
Yeah, and that is still part of the debate. We're still having that debate.
Yeah, and I can understand. I mean, Joe Biden said the other day that he was mocking Trump for making an enemy of China because it implies that somehow they're equal, and he was making the point that America is no way, compared to China, they're far higher, they're far stronger, they have a better economy based on, the kind of future technologies, whereas China's struggling with coal power. They brought a lot of people out of poverty, and they've made great achievements. But to compare the two,
well, hang on.
Crazy.
Militarily, you're right. Militarily, they are 3 decades behind the States. The economy is significantly smaller, but catching up. Soft power, they are beginning to make inroads, but not that much.
I don't see the democracy.
Oh God, no. Well, they certainly have no intention of becoming that. But no. But the only thing I was going to pull you up on, sorry, David, was on technology. They are actually making massive and rapid advances in technology, and especially in AI. But yeah, I mean, they are not yet the United States equal.
I'm not sure about AI. I mean, they might be on AI, but AI for the moment is a problem of brute force. If you can just make a big enough machine with enough processors, enough memory, you can kind of create.
Well, they've built an amazing one. It's the size of a large school building, and that's not your town hall. It's the size of your town hall, and it's a computer, and it can work out. It can process information at the same rate that a human brain can. But it does take a room the size of a library to do it. So it can do extra X billion computations per second, which is what the brain can do. But of course, if, as people suggest, it's going to be Moore's law, doubling in capacity, halving in size each year, it's only going to take 10 whatever years before that computing capacity will be in something the size of a brain. At the moment, it costs $5 million a year in electricity. But again, all that's going to come down. So they are, call it brute force, but yeah, I think that brute force will make them absolute, on that issue, parity with the US. Sorry, to try and get it back to Brexit and Williamson, that's why we need to have some sort of, one of many reasons, some sort of relationship with them.
Yeah, well, to go back on that a little bit, but also to tie it in what we're talking about, Moore's law started to break down, I think, in 2012. It's not really happening. It's fairly now.
And that was on the chips, wasn't it? Computer chips.
It's getting harder and harder because we're down to like 7 nanometer scale chips, and it's getting. I think it's getting to the size where we're almost atomic.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we're moving on to other technologies and quantum and stuff, doesn't it?
Well, quantum chip. I don't think that'll come from America, rather China. China was very good at brute force things, and this is an ilk way like the whole economy. It's all based on they're not democratic. It's like a sheer brute force of paying people low wages, a lot of people producing cheap stuff, and they overwhelm the world economy with their cheap products. So I don't necessarily see China as a competitor that way, because I think the real innovations don't come out of China; they come out of.
I'm happy to say, for once, we disagree.
I just don't think. I just think they're very good at copying things. They're very good at the intellectual copyright thing. It should be a bigger issue than it's being made.
They're the ones who landed on the far side of the moon.
But yeah, but it's a trivial. They're doing trivial. I don't necessarily think they're doing great achievements. I don't think AI is going to be solved by brute force. I think AI is going to be solved by a paradigm shift in the way that we think about. I think we need a different technology.
Anyway, speaking of Gavin Williamson, again, if you look at it in the context of Brexit, Germany and France, similar economies to ours. Germany bigger, but France approximately the same size. So they have the same flexibility as us in that they are economic forces in the world, but they've got the extra that if they want to do something vis-a-vis China, they do it within the EU. And the EU economy is every bit as muscular, shall we say, as the Chinese, and you can go in with that brute strength. We're going in one-on-one, and we are not anywhere near them. So again, in the knowledge of that, if you do a deal here, you're going to annoy that person there, the United States, and vice versa. At the moment, we are caught, and we are caught trying to have the best of both worlds. And in some respects, that won't be a problem. But when it comes to things like security, it is a problem, and the Americans are going to be furious with the Brits for letting in, because the idea is that the 5G networks, it's much harder to separate the core products from the peripheral products, and consequently, as 5G will run our information and security structure, if the Chinese are deep inside it, which they will be, therefore anything that happens within that structure they might have access to, which is why the Americans are even muttering about no longer trusting us as an intelligence source. So, there are issues. You cannot win if you choose one over the other.
Am I right in thinking that America has got a different 5G technology to China, or they've got a competing
Yes,
technology?
and they don't want them inside. Look, I mean, Huawei have offered to do it 30% cheaper than any other people that are capable of building 5G. So that's quite an attractive proposition in a relatively cash-strapped economy. So, you can understand it, especially as some of the intelligence has suggested, look, we think it may not be a problem that we can separate the core from the periphery and we'll only let them into the periphery. The Americans say no, that you can't separate it anymore. The technology doesn't allow it. Look, Canada, I think, is going to say no. Australia, I think, has already said no. New Zealand has said no. We are going to say yes at the moment, precisely because we're trying to balance these two great powers.
So, in the process of taking back control, we're going to basically open up our technology infrastructure to the Chinese, who could do things that we don't know they're going to be doing. They could hack into us. So our
Correct.
security is going to be at risk.
Well, it depends who you believe. If you believe the people that say it's not a problem because they can put firewalls up, or if you say no, if you believe the people that 5G is different to 4G and those barriers don't exist. So that's one of the debates that's going on. But that debate is being played out in the wider debate in post-Brexit, global Britain. Where do we put our weight in this balance? Which foot do we put it on? The foot that leans towards America or the foot that leans towards China? And I just think it's almost an impossible balancing act. You at some point have to have significantly more weight with one than the other, because that's the nature of geopolitics.
Well, I would say, putting my technology hat on as a computer programmer for about nearly my entire life, I would say I would go with America, because I think China...
I love them. China
will do things sloppily, quickly. There was a story recently, one of the big... Is it Vodafone had to announce that Huawei had left in something called Telnet, which is an old internet technology, but it actually allows kind of backdoors into the systems. I just think, knowing the complexity of how computers get immensely complex very, very quickly, I don't necessarily think you can simply put firewalls up and protect you. I think there's the technical challenges would be too great. That's my gut instinct.
That isn't a gut instinct. That's based on some knowledge. Obviously not, super duper. But based on some. Mine is
my computer degree and years as a programmer.
Mine is only based on just how the world often works, and that if you allow what is potentially a non-friendly country into your security structure, how could they possibly resist the temptation to try to take advantage of that?
I mean, the thing is, once you get into these systems and there's millions upon millions of lines of code, that takes a lot of time to figure out. And the sheer complexity of code, it's not simply a case of looking at lines individually. You have to know how they work and how things might be corrupted with, bad intent by bad actors. You can easily find ways to worm your way into a system.
Anyway, we're going to hear a lot more of this, a lot more of Gavin Williamson, and a lot more of this wider debate about where we're going. Now, on Venezuela, relatively briefly. Well, they messed that one up, didn't
I don't understand what's that. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. This stalemate that they're at the moment.
Again, I'm only going on experience of having covered some coups and some wars and how stuff works in the run up to events, which you must get the theatre onto the street. The theatre being, the massive demonstrations, but an awful lot of stuff has to go on before the theatre curtains open. What appears to have happened is that the cast fluffed their lines and or got cold feet, and there's even another suggestion that it was an inside job. So what appears to have happened, and I'm pretty confident about the first bit, there is no way that Guaido appears on a bridge above an airbase and says, right, the revolution starts here, and essentially saying it's a coup d'etat, or that's problematic because if you do think he's the legitimate president, it's not a coup, but let's call it a coup attempt. There's no way you do that unless you're pretty confident that X, Y, and Z is now going to happen, that this army commander has said this, that this intelligence chief has said that. And so you start off with these 70 or 80 troops he had next to him and an armoured car. And you're assuming that within 2 or 3 hours, several army bases, being emptied out of all their kit, and they're going to fall into line behind you. And oops, it's not happening. Quite the opposite. At which point something's clearly gone wrong. And as I said, he just cannot have done this without thinking X, Y, and Z. And the leader of the opposition, who was under house arrest, talks the intelligence officers guarding him into letting him go. Again, he must have said, look, guys, it's all sorted. Jump ship now. So it didn't happen. So clearly something went wrong. Now, here's where it gets a bit murky. They either simply got cold feet and when they were supposed to appear on the stage, didn't, which is possible because this is a life and death decision, or, and this is the really fascinating theory that's now coming up, that 2 or 3 of the guys of the Maduro regime that were talking to the opposition leaders about jumping ship, on D-Day, were actually all the time reporting straight back to Maduro. And so they panicked Guaido into announcing that the revolution starts here, in the full knowledge that the very people that had told Guaido they were going to come out all the time were telling Maduro what was going on and didn't. And he's not looking too clever, and it's looking pretty sticky for him. Sorry to have gone on about that, but it's a fascinating.
And I don't think you've skimmed the surface, haven't you? Because there's that narrative of, wasn't Maduro supposed to have agreed to leave, and then Russia told him to stay?
Yeah, again, you see that it's theoretically possible. It might even be true, but it's also the sort of thing that if you're in the CIA, you just leak out there. Oh yeah, our understanding is, because then you get X people to believe that, and it doesn't look good for him that it was borderline. So we will know in a few years' time. It might be true there may have been a plane waiting with the engines revving. The Russians might have said, because they did. This is factual. The Russians did come in last month, a couple of months ago. You might have I mentioned it in Things We Lost in the Mire, because I knew it was significant. At least 100 special forces and cyber experts and no doubt intelligence flew into Caracas a few weeks ago, precisely for this sort of moment where they can stiffen his backbone, as does the Cube. There's about 20,000 Cuban troops there as well. So all this is going to come out. But at the moment, they have not pulled it off. They're still trying. Stuff could happen, but
it's humiliating for America, though, isn't it?
Yes,
because
it is.
You've got Pence saying, encouraging it. I think John Bolton came out yesterday, and it's rumoured that he wants military involvement. Actually,
I find that very credible. I mean, I know he's the one that came out with the clipboard showing 5,000 troops a few weeks ago, but that was just tweaking people's tails.
I read or heard a line something like it's got the largest petroleum resources in the world, and do we want to leave that to another country?
Yeah, again,
which is pure neocon.
Well, yeah, and there's something in that, except that America has always been the greatest purchaser of Venezuelan oil, including up until earlier this year. The Americans weren't in this for Venezuela's oil; they are already buying Venezuela's oil. I just don't think it's about that.
I think it's about Trump, to be honest. I mean, I know I always bring things back to Trump, but there was a rumour earlier this week that, and I think this was possibly leaked deliberately, that John Bolton thinks he's an idiot.
Well, everybody else does, so, he might as well.
I know everybody else does, but coming from John Bolton, but I doubt if... I hate to kind of take a guess like this. I just don't think Trump's got it in him to start to approve military
I think you
action.
may be right. I mean, for everyone thought the world was about to come to an end when he got elected. But
I think he's a coward.
I don't know that, but he's the one who's drawn down out of Syria. He's the one who's trying to draw down out of Afghanistan. He hasn't gone into Iran. I mean, everyone was saying, there's going to be wars left, right, and centre, and it's been the opposite.
He's a typical bully. He can't even fire his own staff when he wants them. He gets other people to fire them for him. I don't think he's got the courage to do it. I think he's very happy to do anything opposite to whatever Obama did. But actually to do something like this off his own back, I think he'd be scared it'd be his legacy.
It could also be a very astute move not to involve the Americans in what could very easily be a very long and bloody protracted war.
I agree, but I don't necessarily think he's doing it for the right reasons. I just think he's impotent on the world stage.
Right, shall we move on to a Dr. Wright?
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about the Brexit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. No, let's talk about the Brexit results. Which remember we talked about. We didn't have a vote where I live, but attempted to do a spoilt ballot. There's been an awful lot of them.
Has there? Yeah. Well, it was a very low turnout, but it's funny. This morning, the news I've read was because it appears that Lib Dems and the Greens are the parties who have made the gains, and Labour and the Tories have lost. So naturally, the Tories are spinning it as though the people have spoken that we want Brexit done with, which is kind of illogical. I mean, the problem here is, of course, that there's no strong Brexit party standing. Yeah,
well, the losses of Labour and Tories would have been even greater if Farage's lot had stood in this.
Yeah, and then in the European elections, it's going to be a problem because the Remain parties are just going to split the vote terribly.
Yeah.
So I don't even know how much we can read into yesterday.
Well, the majority of us are thoroughly fed up with the two major parties fannying around, and this is an opportunity for a protest vote, as indeed will be the Euro elections. That's all for me.
What worried me is, up here in the northwest, we've got Tommy Robinson standing, and I nearly nipped out yesterday to buy some shoes because my shoes have gone, and I was going to go to Warrington because that's where the shoe shop is, and Tommy Robinson was in Warrington yesterday where he got covered in milkshake.
I saw that,
and there was a really ugly fight broke out.
Yeah, I saw that as well. But on the milkshake incident, overwhelmingly, people are rejoicing that he had a milkshake chucked over him. Forgive me for being a contrarian. I don't agree. I don't rejoice in it. I don't like the man. I don't support anything he says. But he was not being physically aggressive to the man who then chucked him milk. I just don't like that sort of thing.
A little bit in his face. But yeah, I understand. I totally understand it. I am sympathetic to your argument. Whilst I'm also slightly sympathetic.
Look, if somebody chucked a milkshake over Jeremy Corbyn, it would be considered an act of violence.
No, I agree with you, but the guy is up in the northwest deliberately trying to stoke racial discontent, especially in places like Rochdale. These small towns where there is a large Asian population. He is up here trying to exploit the antagonism that we have in the north towards London and Westminster, especially after austerity. There's a lot of misplaced anger up here.
Yep.
So there's a lot of really ugly politics going on. But what I found slightly reassuring was he's not getting much of a kind reception. People don't seem to be buying into it, which I'm hoping is... I don't mind people buying into Brexit and even to a degree Farage, because that is the more acceptable side of the Brexit debate. But I'm just glad I'm hoping Tommy Robinson doesn't even creep in. I think that would be a very bad point.
I'd be interested to see how many votes he gets in. I think he might be standing in the Euro elections. Look,
like
I said, being this pathetic centrist that I am, again, I was brought up that you didn't start anything when you were a kid, but if anybody started on you, you tried to make sure you finished it. But you didn't start it, but that does not dovetail with the people that go out against Robinson, whose views are no fascists on our streets. We will use violence to smash you off the streets. It's just not where I am. Yeah, well, I mean, I can understand why sometimes it comes to it.
Wait a minute. The other video there was a guy stood in the middle of the street. He said something to Robinson, but he had his hands in his pockets, and one of Robinson's goons, and he is surrounded by goons. You know, he is a polite side of effectively the EDL. You know, what used to be the National Front. This guy did barge this bloke out violently, and it turned into a fight where these goons were beating up. Local.
No, I saw that. It's disgusting. But I'm just. Are they? Is it the same thing where Robinson's talking to this Asian bloke, and that it's relevant is skin colour in this issue, but he's saying to him, "Look, I didn't do this, I didn't do that," in a relatively calm way, and the guy suddenly chucks a milkshake all over his face, his hair, and his suit.
Let's be careful though. Tommy Robinson has got is developed a very, very clever line. And this is why he is in the public news. This is why he's in the public eye at the moment. He understands that when was it the EDL he started, or there was one of the movements.
I think it was the EDL,
yeah. He realised that he was going to get nowhere politically with a group which was associated with violence. Yeah. So he's pulled back on that, but he treads a very, very fine line between what's acceptable and not acceptable in order to provoke people and then say, "Hey, it's not us." Meanwhile, he's got his goons behind him. There's a lot of playing for the cameras and playing and trying to sort of
agreed. And when you come to those thugs and the way they behaved in the town centre, it's disgusting. And he is with them and they are with him and they are one of a kind. But in that particular incident, he did not physically assault the young man until he had that
punched him.
milkshake.
He punched him.
No. Sorry, until he had what is in its essence an attack. The milkshake chucked at him.
And the other video, they did actually attack and push somebody around. But to bring it back to geopolitics, what's really sad was where that happened was the street where Jonathan Ball, Parry and Ball, the two young boys died in the Warrington bomb attack. Yeah. And that was literally just on the spot where one of the bombs went off. So it's kind of, the whole thing is kind of wheels within wheels, It's really sad. It's really sad.
That we can agree on. Anyway, a doctor writes, what have you got?
Right, okay, this is the really important news of the week.
Indeed.
The UK will be keeping our 1p's and 2p's. They were talking about scrapping them, the government, because alongside the £50 note, they were going to save it for cost purposes. And the fact that, interesting note, no pun intended, the £50 note has been popular among criminals for laundering money. But they're not going to get rid of it. We're going to keep them, even though they recently got rid of the half-p, because apparently the half-p cost more to make than the actual face value of the coin, which begs the question, how much does a 1p cost?
Yes.
I checked in America, the 1 cent coin costs 1.5 cents to make. I would suspect that 1p costs more than 1p to make. So it's a strange decision.
That second bit is interesting. I mean, I couldn't care less about 1p's and 2p's and whether they remain in circulation or not.
No, I'm the same. I agree.
I mean, I never quite got over though the £1 note, because he used to go out with, like, if you had like 5 £1 notes in your back pocket, oh my God, you felt like a king. But having £5 coins, or whatever the equivalent is, £20 coins, it's just not the same.
Yeah. But I find it fascinating, the fact that the coins must cost more to make.
Yes, well, that is interesting. But emotionally, no. When decimalisation came in, my brother told me that the 5 pences melted in your pocket, and I was to give all mine to him.
Anyway, a beluga whale discovered in Norway might be a secret Russian weapon.
Yeah,
Go on.
No. Sorry, that was possibly my favourite story of the week.
Yeah. It was wearing a harness, and on the harness it said "Equipment of St. Petersburg." And apparently it's not uncommon. I think the US used to use mammals such as dolphins and sea lions for many purposes. That's my dad joke of the week. The idea is
you did that on purpose, didn't you?
Yeah. I'm having a whale.
Go on.
They can attach mines to ships or even operate as a living torpedo. But the good news is the whale has now defected. It's not gone back to Russia. It stayed inside Norwegian waters where it's entertaining the locals with tricks.
Fantastic.
I love that story.
And it's very friendly, apparently, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. It looks friendly. Well, they always look friendly, don't they?
Until they
Even
bite
when
you.
they're ripping your face off, yeah.
They're not unlike that Karawara bird, but they're sort of like an aquatic version of them. but go on.
Yeah, don't bring Michael Parkinson into it. It took me about a week to stop laughing at
Happy
that.
days.
The London Marathon was enveloped by scandal this week when a runner dressed as a giant flip-flop was awarded the Guinness World Record for running the fastest marathon dressed as a shoe. Charlie Field ran the race in 3 hours and 35 minutes. Apparently his rival, Paul Bennett, dressed as a trainer, claimed the record for himself even though he ran it in 4 hours and 14 minutes. But if you look at the outfits, you've got to be on the side of the guy with the trainer. The bloke, he had like a proper, one of these crazy big outfits.
Mm-hmm.
The guy dressed as a flip-flop had a little apron, like a kitchen apron on. So, I think it makes sense to, strip him of he should be stripped of the award. I do think an outfit has to be a proper outfit. Did you see the guy who can get across the
Big Ben
across the finish just as Big Ben? And then that's a proper outfit.
Yeah,
isn't it?
no, that was a lot of respect for that.
Yeah. There's staying in the world of athletics. There's an interesting story coming out about Caster Semenya.
Mm-hmm.
Semenya. She's the women's 800 meter world champion. She has an intersex condition, which means she has raised testosterone. The thing that makes men stronger. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport has ruled that she has to reduce her testosterone to levels more commonly with females. But this is part of that whole ongoing debate. I think we've mentioned it a few times with if you're going to redefine what gender is, how do you define what a woman is? Who runs in women's races as opposed to what people who run in men's races? If men and female are suddenly
Yeah, well, two things on that. One, if you look at the countries that oppose the ban, they one or two of them, they seem to be those countries that in another age, all their shot putters had beards. The female shot putters. I think there's something that I think the dope testing element of this has been somewhat overlooked. But the other thing is, I certainly think you should ban. Who was that? Well, he's retired anyway. The guy who did the lightning bolt. Bolt. Usain Bolt. Yeah. Because I just don't think it's fair if you're 6'5". So I think if you're gonna have to lower exactly, you're gonna lower your testosterone. Well, I think only men that are between 5'10" and 6'2" should be allowed to be in the sprints. There you go.
Well, this is the Michael Phelps argument. There's a good article over the Washington Post that were talking about the fact that Michael Phelps had double jointed ankles or something, which allows him to kick better. Yeah, and they're saying it's genetic and her condition is genetic. But the problem is, if a man then decides I want to now see myself as a woman, define myself as a woman, because our notions of gender are fluid. Does it then mean that they are allowed to run? Because even if they said, that's my testosterone's too high.
That's the other part of what it is. It's not actually about her.
It's not about her at all. Yeah, that's exactly what it's out. Last story of the week. This is. I think we can probably talk about this every single week. Talk Radio allowed David Icke to promote his new film, which I thought was shocking.
Yes, I agree.
They gave him 35 minutes of airtime, even though his career's been made. A lot of crazy conspiracy theories, but a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda.
Oh my! Wall to wall, yeah.
Yeah. It's advocating the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Yeah.
And this came. This week there was New York Times published a cartoon which was full of anti-Semitic tropes.
Yeah, I saw that. Basically, it is Trump being led as a blind man by a blind dog that just happens to look like Netanyahu.
Yeah,
the Star of David of it. Oh, it's straight out of the 1930s. I'm astonished that the New York Times got a bit of form on this, but you'd have thought some alarm bells would have gone somewhere up the chain.
Well, I've written an article on it, so that'll be, I think, on Reaction. On
good.
Saturday,
I look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was something else. Oh yeah, no, but Icke. I don't. The stuff about lizards is one thing, but when he goes into Holocaust denial. Questioning the existence of gas chambers, promoting the protocols of the Elders of Zion, to give him 35 minutes airtime to promote a film and not seriously challenge him is
I think what's happening with Ike, and I think what happens with a lot of them, including, I must say, Farage, is TV bookers see them as people. I mean, people laugh at Ike. That's the reason he's invited on. Oh, he's going to come on and spite a load of nonsense. We'll get a bit of exposure in the media. People will have a laugh at him. But I heard a word this week: signal boosting. What you're actually doing is you're amplifying those signals. You're actually, a lot of people might laugh at them, but that stuff is getting into the fabric of society. These crazy little.
And the 5,000 or 6,000 people that he attracts to theatres, a lot of them aren't laughing at him, and that this is going to just grow that audience. Yes, irresponsible came to mind.
Yeah. Anyway, last story. It's not actually a story. It's just me pointing in the direction. If you've not looked up the story of John Oliver and the Japanese otter, look it up. It's too complicated to explain, but there's an ongoing feud between a Japanese cartoon otter and the TV comedian John Oliver, which is well worth reading up on.
Can you explain it for me?
It's really complicated.
Go on. Yeah. I challenge you. We have got time. We've always got time. We've got time to explain the inexplicable.
Actually, I'll tell you what. I'll put it in the show notes. I didn't include show notes last week, and I had somebody email saying that they enjoyed our show notes. So I will write up the show notes, and there will be a link to the Japanese otter story.
Is it time for things we lost in the mire?
I think so.
Thank you. The Solomon Islands is considering cutting ties with Taiwan. If so, it plays into China's strategy of persuading countries not to recognise what it regards as part of China. China. Do you know how many times we've said China in this episode?
I was having a drink then, so I couldn't splutter my...
Well, no, I think it would be acceptable for you to limit the amount of times you have to put that sound in when we make that sound.
No, it's not possible. Just don't say the word.
Okay. The Solomon Islands is the largest, as you probably know, David, it's the largest of the 6 Pacific states that maintain ties with Taiwan. So if they do cut them, the others might follow. And who buys 65% of the Solomon Islands exports?
Let's say China. 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 I have to have my China.
China.
Yes, it's China.
China.
In other news, Lebanon's defence minister has said, quote, "I do not think Israel is prepared for war. The balance of power has changed. If they target our airport, their airport will be targeted. If they target our oil plants, their oil plants will be targeted." Which is relatively routine stuff, except why? Why now? Why is all this chatter going on? And it's because past few weeks, and I'm not really sure why, but the Arab press, especially the Lebanese press, there's been an upsurge of speculation about a war between Hezbollah and Israel this summer. Obviously, no idea if it's going to happen, but it's been quite noticeable how many people are talking about it. Last week, we mentioned that President Putin signed a decree to make it easier for residents of the republics over in Ukraine, in the Donbass region, to get Russian citizenship. Well, now they've opened a centre to issue the passports, and it's helping to set up registration centres in the Donbass. The polls suggest 86% of people in the Donbass will apply. So if that's true, that's 500,000 new Russians within a few years. And that changes the dynamics, because Russia says it will protect Russians wherever they live. So if you've suddenly got what they regard as 500,000 Russians, not Russian speakers, but Russians now living in Ukraine, that could tip them into certain actions. That's going to play out over the next few years. Right, letters. We got one from Rob. Did you see it?
I can't remember.
No, sorry. Okay. Thank you, Rob. He wrote, we talked about Greta Thunberg and climate change. Rob writes, "Many years ago, I was the recipient of a generous NERC grant and was inhabiting the same department in computer rooms as people who were doing climate change work. My particular area was flooding, and I spent most of the time working with buggered up models and was guessing a lot. I wasn't alone in this. It's no surprise that the predicted apocalypse is not yet upon us. Rob thinks that being realistic, human activity is obviously having an effect, but calculating the true magnitude is beyond where science is at the moment. Admitting to that, though, doesn't get people concerned. And he thinks it's better to be safe than sorry, that the government has probably moved about as quickly as the public opinion will allow it. And then I was very interested in this last paragraph because it dovetails with something you've said in the past. Rob says, it's interesting how much we laud ourselves for our superior attitude compared to the 1970s. And we are certainly a more tolerant and equal society now. However, in the UK, our personal behaviour in the environmental arena is one thing that is regressive. More car ownership, longer commutes, way more flights, more stuff consumed, nothing gets mended, it gets chucked, food miles, clothes miles. Anybody ever heard of bottle deposits? Remember them?
Yeah. It's funny actually because one of the things I did this week, I know this is going into the realm of the insignificant, is I completely buggered up my back because I mowed the back lawn, and somebody on Twitter suggested that I should replace the back lawn with a fake grass, and a lot of people around here have actually got fake grass lawns, but it's environmentally terrible.
It is. The birds won't thank you. And
exactly.
You should also plant some trees.
Yeah,
in the vast acres of your back lawn.
Well, I have a big tree in the back garden, and the neighbours keep wanting us to cut it down, but I refuse to because one, my dad planted it, and two, it is home to tree. It's home to birds. It's terrible. Everybody cuts the trees down.
I'm seeing a whole new side to you.
Yeah. Well, I am a bit of a. Well, I hate gardening, but I like gardens.
From Pete, first time ever in disagreeing with both of you on the subject of US politics. How dare you, Pete?
Who's this?
Pete.
Pete.
Yeah.
Oh, I need surnames and addresses here.
Yeah, we know where you live, Pete. He says Biden, I'm afraid, will implode badly as more and more comes about his creepy, sleazy traits. Your disparaging remarks on Trump overlook the latest growth data that makes the UK economy the best ever. It really is going great guns at the moment. Jobs, it's lowest unemployment for about 30 years.
It's irrespective of Trump. Sorry, I was hearing music.
Oh, sorry, that was my Legion Agate app just played at me. I'm terribly sorry.
I thought the angels were coming from me. But America's doing great in many respects, but it's irrespective of Trump. It's hard to say it's irrespective because of Trump because it started under Obama. He's not. His tax cut hasn't really done a great lot, but it's more to do with his personal conduct and the whole thing about gaslighting, this thing about fake news and constantly, denying the obvious. And I don't even go there. I agree about Biden. Biden could implode. I noticed this week there was a story that a journalist had noted that they'd been kept well away from Biden by some quite strong-handed assistants, and I think that's what Biden needs. I think he needs to be controlled because he has got the capacity to do something silly which the media can then exploit.
What fun. Right, lastly, letter from Bex. Hi David, you guys mentioned the Northwest Passage. Could you chat a bit more about that? Maybe how important or not the shipping routes still are for the economy and the world. Which are the main ones? I'm also wondering about the Royal Navy and how relevant it is nowadays. How many warships do you reckon the Navy have? Not including little ones like mine hunters. It's less than most people think. Is it 19? Always enjoy the podcast. Thanks, Bex. Say hello to Posh for us. Right.
Well, are you going to mention that about the Navy?
Go on.
Yeah, I was going to mention. I was going to say I'm reading this Churchill book, and I'm only up to like the lead up to the World War One, but he was making the point that we had an enormous navy at that time.
Oh, God,
he said something like we were going to always have 60% more ships than Germany. Whatever Germany would make,
that was part of the whole arms race. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane.
As of April 2017, there were 73 vessels in the UK Armed Forces, 64 of them in the Royal Navy, 9 in the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. That's a reduction of 3 from 2016, but there's 2 aircraft carriers coming online, so there's expected to be 77 vessels by the end of the year. Now, Bex talked about which are the sort of hardcore ones. There's 6 Type 45 guided missile destroyers. That's pretty hardcore. And there's 13 frigates, 2 assault ships, the 2 carriers, about 12 subs, 4 of which are nuclear carriers. But it's not just about numbers. I'll give you an example. The US is the biggest navy and the most powerful. These are the most powerful navies. The US, China, Russia, UK is 4th. Really? Then Japan. Because it's not just about the numbers, because Colombian Navy has got 295 vessels, but it would be no match for the UK Navy. So it's about the kit that you've got. And if you put the carriers with the subs, and especially these Type 45 destroyers, then you talk about some serious firepower. Some of the other issues I'll deal with in last week's podcast this week. Briefly, the moon. You remember that, David? The moon?
The moon.
Yeah,
I remember the moon, yeah.
You were giving false, fake scientific news last week.
This is going to be about the... I'm going to say it. So elliptical orbit.
You said it was a round orbit or what?
No. I said it's probably largely round because there's never going to be a true round.
All right. Well, damn. In that case, you're partially right. The moon's orbit around the Earth is not a perfect circle, but it is very nearly circular.
Yeah, I said that. I think.
BSE. We were wondering how the cattle got it, and we wondered. We had this vague memory of them eating beef.
Spinal columns.
Yes, cattle are believed to have been infected by being fed meat and bone meal that contained the remains of other cattle who spontaneously developed the disease. Who found the Northwest Passage? Remember, I was saying some bloke did. Well, it was the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. Yeah, him.
Amundsen. Yeah.
It was 1905. He made it to the south through King William Island range and then through onto the Bering Strait when Amundsen encountered a whaling ship from San Francisco coming in the opposite direction. He knew he would complete the Northwest Passage, and in his diary he wrote, "The Northwest Passage was done, my boyhood dream. At that moment it was accomplished. A strange feeling welled up in my throat. I was somewhat overstrained and worn. It was weakness in me, but I felt tears in my eyes." Well, you would. It's bloody freezing, but also you've just found the Northwest Passage, for God's sake. You're allowed to cry. The ice melting. Yeah, the passage wasn't commercially viable to ships really ever. So there was like a handful of ships that traversed it in the decades after his 1905, 1906 was his voyage. That's now changed, and the entire route was ice-free for the first time in recorded history in the summer of 2007. And so in 2012, a record 30 ships made it through, and in 2016, a tourist cruise ship went through the Northwest Passage. Right, at this point, could you possibly look up one of our podcasts where there was that alarm featuring the chicken song?
Oh, you want the chicken song?
Well, I'll tell you why. I forgot to search out an alarm sound this week after last week's very successful giraffe sounds. So if you could put that in here, we'll get on to the facts.
Order chicken in the air, stick a deck chair on your nose, buy a jumbo jet, and then bury all your clothes. Paint your left knee green, then extract your wisdom teeth, form a string quartet, and pretend your name is Keith.
Which this week are about shipping routes.
Shipping routes. I was going to say shipping routes.
Ah, good man. Well, don't fall asleep now. I know it's good for insomnia, but this is actually quite interesting. Fact! Shipping is significantly cheaper than road or even rail, which would explain the fact that about 90% of global trade is by water. Around 2/3 of ship crews in the world have no means of communication whilst they're on the open sea. Only about 1 in 10 will have freely available internet. In 2019. It's a big place, the world. Females consist... How many seafarers do you think... what percentage of seafarers do you think are women?
What percentage?
I'm talking about, shipping, big ships, containers and all that.
I'd say it's higher than you expect. 30%.
2% it says here.
2%?
That's what it says here.
Wow.
Females constitute only about 2% of seafarers, and people from the Philippines make up more than 1/3 of all crews worldwide, with nearly a 250,000. The primary choke points, can you name them?
All the canals. Suez Canal.
Yes.
Panama Canal. The
Straight
Manchester to Liverpool Canal.
The Leeds-Liverpool Canal.
Manchester Ship Canal, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the major global choke points. The Strait of...
Oh, God, Hormuz.
Hormuz, Hormuz.
Yeah.
And the Strait of...
whatever.
Malacca. Okay, and there are
which is the one opening into Gibraltar, around Gibraltar.
That's the Strait of Gibraltar.
Oh, is it? Oh.
Yeah. Secondary choke points include the Dover Strait. Fact: the Dover Strait is the busiest world's shipping lane. 500 to 600 ships a day pass through the narrow strait between the UK and France. I mean, it depends how it's measured, whether it's tonnage or number of ships. And I think sometimes on the measurement, Dover is there for both. It's estimated that there are 10,000 shipping containers lost at sea every year.
Including that one we talked about
That's
last
right,
week
including one that has
Garfield
phones.
Telephones in, yeah.
Lost containers are often damaged by waves. Sorry, I got whales. Well, they might be damaged by whales, but they're damaged by waves and sink quickly. But some may float for a little while. As if we haven't got enough bloody... we're shipwrecked. We're floating around. There's a bloody great big container just underneath the surface.
There's a famous one of a load of rubber ducks, isn't there?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And it's been used to plot the tides
That's
around.
right.
Scientists have used them to sort of figure out where all the tides are.
The containers that do float tend to do so just below the surface, which is a bit of a bugger. To give you an example of how much it costs to ship something, a bicycle would be roughly $10. While a soda can, you can tell I read this off an American site. Damn, can I just say all that again? A bicycle would be about £8.40, whilst a can of fizzy pop would be less than a penny. To translate, approximately, which is, think of the markup on a can of Coke.
Well, it's interesting subject that, because I don't know if you're like me, but this house, you buy a lot of things from China.
They're learning from China.
And you often wonder how the hell they actually afford the postage. Because if I want to send you something now, like the tiniest thing, it'd cost me like £3. Yet they can send stuff from the other side of China. And you're buying the whole item for like 50p.
It is odd, and I don't know. I mean, how much are stamps in China? Maybe
China.
Maybe they're free.
I just don't know. I don't know how you even compete with that kind of company who can sort of send something from China.
China.
For literally £1.
Will you stop saying China?
China?
Sorry.
Approximately 97% of all shipping containers are manufactured in
Malaysia.
China.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
It is less expensive to ship Scottish cod 10,000 miles away to China to be filleted and then sent back to Scotland than it is to pay Scottish filleters to do the job.
This is insane, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is why Trump... I mean, there's this kind of fact that puts Trump in power.
Yeah. It's cheaper. I mean, it's economy of scale, isn't it? You've got these incredibly massive containers in these incredibly massive ships.
I don't think it's just economy of scale, it's economy of labour, and it's to do with the morals of paying people very little to work extremely long hours. Yep. I mean, we don't have... We yet, so far, do not have factories where we have suicide netting around them.
Well,
sorry to bring the tone down, but I mean, that's what it comes down to,
On a happier note, the largest... Well, I don't know if this is happier, actually, but it's fascinating because it's a fact that the largest ships can store 745 million bananas.
Wow.
In nearly 15,000 containers. And that is a banana for just about every single person in Europe and North America can be stored in one of these massive ships. Yeah. Right. We are way over time. Do you want to say goodbye?
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye. I shall leave you with Condoleezza Rice trying to explain to... This is in the context of who's the president of Venezuela. Condoleezza Rice trying to explain to George Bush that who is the president of China.
Oh, Condoleezza, nice to see you. What's happening?
Well, Mr. President, I have the report here about the new leader in China.
Great, Condi. Lay it on me.
Mr. President, who is the new leader of China?
Well, that's what I want to know.
Well, that's what I'm telling you, Mr. President.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, Condi. Who is the new leader of China?
Yes.
I mean the feller's name.
Hugh.
The guy in China.
Hugh.
The new leader of China.
Hugh.
The Chinaman.
Hugh is leading China, Mr. President.
What are you asking me for?
I'm telling you, Hugh is leading China.
Well, I'm asking you, Condi, who is leading China?
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Will you or will you not tell me the name of the new leader of China?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Arafat is in China? I thought he was in the Middle East.
That's correct, sir.
Then who's in China?
Yes, sir.
Yasser is in China?
No, sir.
Then who is?
Yes, sir.
Yasser?
No, sir.
I need to know the name of the new leader of China, so I want you to get me the Secretary General of the United Nations on the phone.
Coffee NN?
No, thanks. And Condi, call me George.
The end is in sight.
The colourful phrase used by a charismatic figure.
This is the Trump shutdown.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the nations of the world.